It's a great honor to be here. I'm going to speak broadly about my situation with the University of Illinois, and I hope to put it sort of in a broader context of academic freedom and related matters. There's a lot to unpack in my termination from the University of Illinois. The first thing we must realize is that my situation is not exceptional. We're all affected by it. In the boardrooms and classrooms, as well as in the STEM fields, arts, humanities, social sciences, physical plants, and student affairs. Those effects bode well for few other than the corporate elite and the well-heeled commentariat. Before I say anything about Palestine and the University of Illinois, let me first acknowledge that what happened to me has been happening to ethnic, sexual, and cultural minorities in academia for decades, African Americans especially. A shameful irony is that Jews were long marginalized in the academy because of their supposed dangers to Anglo civility, victim to rationalizations for their exclusion that sadly don't look terribly different than the ones now being used against supporters of Palestinian human rights. A friend and one of my intellectual heroes said of academic freedom, "It was never for us anyway." Any cursory review of the history of American universities proves this observation true. The suppression of blackness and indigeneity predates the purge of Palestine, and in many ways contextualizes and sustains it. The regulation of deviant bodies, ideas, and identities has influenced American campuses since their inception. With some exceptions, the ethos of the university as a site of special intellectual dispensation came into existence based on exclusion. My situation makes no sense outside of this context. Nothing in academia makes sense at the level of individuality. We are in it together, whether or not we want to be. Why then has my case received such attention? It's not an easy question to answer, because much of it has to do with unquantifiable factors like timing and the mood of the zeitgeist. Some answers do exist, however, which I believe illuminate important things about the state of speech in universities today. First, the university's decision was egregious. Even folks generally uninterested in academic freedom took note of the administration's high-handed discourse and underhanded behavior. Its decision appears to be punitive, leaving me and my family in a difficult situation, without income, a home, or health insurance. It also comes on the heels of Israel's devastation of Gaza, which resulted in the death of over 500 children. People were already tuned into Palestine. Other reasons. The University of Illinois is a good school with a distinguished history. It's supposed to be above such Bush League actions, though its history says otherwise. The presence of institutional racism on campus, from the not really retired Chief Illini Weck to declining black enrollment, has caused much frustration to become more explicit. In short, people working in academia are fed up with administrative intimidation, with implicit and explicit racism, with trustee interference, with eroded academic freedom, with lack of shared governance, with neoliberal structures. My firing includes all of these concerns. It is a flashpoint for administrative misconduct and faculty grievance. I don't think we should overlook the sheer arrogance with which the Board of Trustees has conducted itself. When James Montgomery, the only trustee to vote in favor of my appointment, finished an extraordinarily moving speech about his experiences of racism, board members responded with ill-advised and unfunny jokes. I think more than anything, the egregiousness of UIUC's decision illustrates that the furtive codes of campus repression have become less necessary. Academia has never been free. Universities don't like to be openly repressive, however. There are countless mechanisms in place to ensure conformity to the imperatives of the powerful and wealthy. These mechanisms regulate tone, content, action, and access. They constitute and co-opt reward systems and pervade both the notion and practice of merit. They will become unnecessary only when campuses become openly dictatorial. UIUC took a significant and unapologetic step in that direction. Other universities recently have made similar moves. Upper administrators, like most politicians, seize any pretext to consolidate power, whether it comes from pro-Israel lobbying, donor pressure, or conservative outrage. If boards and other upper administrators can simply decide, without faculty consultation or the inconvenience of shared governance, who is fit to teach and research, then the paradigms of higher education change in ways that contravene the very purpose of the university. I have no nostalgia about our academic past, or of the utility of free speech in American society as a whole. Rights have never been comprehensive. But with this new paradigm, academic freedom won't even exist in theory. The business people who occupy governing boards will subsume intellectual pursuits to the fiscal interests that motivate any other corporate entity. Please bear in mind that members of the UIUC board admitted that in a meeting, a student representative read aloud some of my tweets, and within the space of 10 minutes, the board decided I was anti-Semitic and that therefore they couldn't have me on campus. This is remarkable. First of all, it indicates that I was indeed fired for the content of my political speech. More important, the board ignored a plethora of university bylaws regarding the hiring and firing of professors. It completely abrogated the work and vision of the American Indian Studies program, and it consciously damaged the university's ability to function normally based on a desire to appease donors. They accomplished all of this under the guise of multicultural valor. That is, protecting the campus from intolerance or discomfort. Please also bear in mind that board members have zero qualifications to evaluate my teaching or scholarship. They've never taught college. They know nothing about indigenous peoples, American Indians, the Israel-Palestine conflict, Arab Americans, Palestine, the Middle East, Pacific Islanders, military occupation, native nationalism, literary criticism, hermeneutics, critical theory, decolonization, scholarship, journal publishing, peer review, university presses, departmental service, advising, grading, curriculum, or how to compose a solitary footnote. How exactly this makes them qualified to make hiring decisions on behalf of the American Indian Studies program is a mystery, but they're quite certain they're capable arbiters of academic hiring. Questions arise about funding, but they all have an easy answer. It's always in some way about funding, isn't it? Always. If you crunch the raw numbers, though, it's clear that the university doesn't receive a windfall from those quick to complain about criticism of Israel. Steve Miller's largest gift appears to have been $500,000. Other donors who complained cited figures of a few $100,000. This is chump change to any huge research university. The value of the Zionist donors isn't merely about bank balances. It's about respectability and the unquantifiable value that accompanies it. Siding with Israel isn't necessarily about making money. It's about political ambition, conformity, establishment bona fides, state power. In other words, maintaining the status quo. It's about keeping power consolidated among the elite. It's about not setting the terrible precedent of allowing the colonized a say in their own futures. Political capital coheres and can never be precisely measured by supporting the preferred position of the elite. There's rarely risk in siding with the powerful, but never is there dignity in such a choice. Academics themselves are often complicit in restrictions on our freedom, so I don't think it's helpful to create a firm distinction between faculty and administration. The distinction should be made around faculty interests and administrative interests. One needn't be an administrator to supplement administrative interests. For this reason, I hope we complicate academic freedom even as we vigorously defend it. For example, contingent faculty have no functional academic freedom. They can be fired for unpopular speech without much recourse. It's not just finances that compel administrators to rely more heavily on untenured labor. It ensures a power balance that strongly favors the administration. The government has long relied on the private workplace to stifle speech rights, whereas one, hypothetically, cannot be imprisoned for speech, one can be fired by private employers for it, a mechanism of plutocratic control. It's a further entanglement of state and corporation, and a further entanglement of corporation and university. The rights of campus governance usually skew in the direction of convention. One way this happens is through unexamined commonplaces of language. Scholarship, for instance, is never supposed to be political. What does political mean in this context? Basically, fighting injustice. Scholarship and scholars are supposed to be above such trifling pursuits. We demystify the things we study, but we don't participate in them. To be called political is immediately to become suspect among one's colleagues, to be marked as radical, another term with its own history of coerciveness. Serious scholars can never be radical. Let's look at the term most relevant to our current situation, civility, which is a reboot of the long-standing canon of collegiality. I believe that civility, although it performs the same coercive function as collegiality, is far more insidious and threatening. Before I explain why, though, a quick overview of how something that sounds so innocuous, even desirable, is in fact repressive. I've mentioned informal modes of repression. They're not informal in the sense of being random, but of being unauthorized or extra-legal. All industrial democracies rely to some degree on informal repression, what Chomsky called manufacturing consent. It's endemic to universities in particular because the conceits of shared governance and academic freedom must be delimited without open suppression, though open suppression happens plenty. Hence, collegiality is a measure of performance. It is a sprawling and subjective word, which is precisely its utility. I'm not going to attempt the definition because I consider that to be a pointless enterprise. Let's instead examine how its ambiguity facilitates conformity to majoritarian sensibilities. Valuable ideas disrupt, reorder, undermine, confront, subvert, unsettle, upset, menace, admonish, forebode. Critical thinking is fundamentally incompatible with conformity, which is collegiality's primary desire. Collegiality largely performs two functions. It can be used as a pretext to punish somebody whose work is stellar but who doesn't fit in with colleagues. And it can name unconventional scholarship as inferior because it doesn't recycle established ideas and methodologies. Collegiality is the etiquette of submission. It's impossible to be collegial when challenging the common sense of corporate dominion, no matter how politely you state the criticism. Now, collegiality has given way to civility, which creates a new set of challenges to academic freedom. The usefulness of the term as a silencing mechanism is apparent by how many upper administrators have embraced it. Its basic function is identical to that of collegiality, but it more explicitly evokes colonial violence. The very act of using uncivil to describe supporters of Palestine, or any other site of decolonization, is a terrible irony. The accusation locates the subject in the wretchedness of subhumanity, but implicates the speaker in centuries of colonization and genocide. Remember, I was hired in the American Indian Studies program. I still shake my head that the powers that be decided to rationalize their abrogation of academic freedom and faculty governance by invoking the terminology of New World colonization. It actually puts me in mind of George W. Bush calling his war on Iraq a crusade. And it's another reminder that there's no appreciable correlation between intelligence and authority.